I woke up from a coma to an empty room. No dad, no brother, no familiar face. Just a fluorescent ceiling buzzing above me, and a single note on the table with 4 words that gutted me more than the accident ever could. We stopped paying. Good luck. For a moment I thought I had died and come back to a life that no longer wanted me. But then the door opened. My mother's old lawyer stepped in with a man in an expensive suit I'd never seen before. He looked at me the way people look at a bomb right before it goes off. "Your father made a mistake," the lawyer said, almost smiling. "He forgot who you really are." And that was the moment I realized my family wasn't just cruel, they were terrified. Terrified of the one truth they tried to bury with my mother. And with me. Before I tell you everything, I'd love to know you're here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection reminds me I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my story resonates with you even a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'm Cale Arden, and this is the truth my family never wanted the world to hear. I woke to the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a hospital. Not the rhythmic beep of monitors, not the shuffle of nurses. Just a hollow quiet sharp enough to make my pulse spike. My eyes adjusted slowly to the ceiling lights of Swedish Medical Center, and for a full minute I couldn't tell if I was alive or floating somewhere between the world I left and the one waiting to meet me. But then, the ache hit. A deep, bone-heavy pain that spread across my body as if every nerve was being rebooted at once. I tried lifting my hand and found it trembling thin foreign. 3 months. My body felt every hour of it. What snapped me fully awake wasn't the pain. It was the emptiness. No flowers, no cards. Oh, no jacket draped over a chair. Nothing that said someone cared enough to wait for me to open my eyes. Then I saw it. A single folded slip of paper on the bedside table. My father's handwriting rigid, slanted, unmistakable. We stopped paying. Good luck. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. Elias Arden, the man the world admired for his leadership, the man Seattle's business press called a visionary, had walked away from his own son and signed off my survival like closing a bad quarter. A nurse appeared in the doorway, startled to see me conscious. Her relief quickly shifted into something like hesitation. "You've been in a coma for 3 months, Mr. Arden," she said softly. "I'm sorry. Your family never visited, and 2 weeks ago your father signed a release form stating he would no longer be financially responsible. If the machines needed to be withdrawn, the hospital had his permission." The words hollowed out my chest in a way the accident never could. But then she added something that made everything tilt. "Someone else covered your bills. Full payment. They asked us not to reveal their name. A stranger cared enough to keep me alive. My family didn't." Before I could make sense of any of it, the door opened again, this time with purpose. Solomon Drake walked in, the lawyer my mother trusted until the day she died. Behind him was a man I'd never seen, tall, sharply dressed, carrying the quiet authority of someone used to commanding rooms instead of entering them. Solomon's gaze swept over me, assessing, relieved, then razor-focused. "Cale," he said, "your father just made the biggest mistake of his life." Adrian Wolfe stepped forward, expression unreadable. "He forgot who you really are." The two of them exchanged a look before Solomon closed the blinds, shutting out the hallway light. "We need to talk privately. What we're about to tell you," he said, "changes everything." And just like that, the empty room felt less like abandonment, and more like the opening scene of a life my family never expected me to wake up for. Solomon insisted I be wheeled into a small consultation room down the hall, a windowless space normally used for family decisions, diagnoses, endings. It felt fitting. My old life had already ended. I just hadn't been told yet. Adrian sat across from me, fingers steepled, studying me with a familiarity that made no sense. "You've been working for me," he said, "for almost 5 years. I blinked. "What? Not as Cale Arden. As K. Strategic architect, crisis analyst, ghost savior of deals worth billions. Wolf Capital has been relying on your brilliance for years because no one in your family ever bothered to recognize it. My mind reeled. The late-night analyses, the anonymous international consultations, the encrypted communications I had believed they were small freelance projects. A lifeline I built to stay sane under the weight of my father's dismissiveness. But they were more. Much more. You paid my hospital bills, I said slowly. Of course, Adrian replied. We don't let assets die. Especially not the one who rescued half our portfolio without anyone knowing. Then Solomon placed a thick folder on the table. My mother's name across the top. Lysandra Hale. My chest tightened. He opened it carefully. Kyle, your mother didn't just work at Arden Dynamics. She created it. She was the founder, not your father. And she kept 71% of the company through a holding structure your father never controlled. The room felt smaller. She meant for you to inherit everything, Solomon continued. But Elias erased her, scrubbed her from the company's history. He bought off journalists, he altered records, he buried the truth so deeply he believed no one would ever dig it up. My hands clenched. Rage simmered beneath my ribs, not wild, but cold, precise. Solomon slid forward the original ownership documents, stamped, notarized, unshakable. But then he revealed the twist that snapped something open inside me. She built a trust, he said. $920 million. It activates only under one condition: you must be abandoned by your family during a medical emergency. Abandoned. Just like the note on my bedside table. Just like the signature that approved pulling the plug. My father had triggered my mother's trap with his own cruelty. Solomon's voice softened. You're not just inheriting the money. You're inheriting her voting rights, her controlling interest, her authority. Arden Dynamics, what it really is, belongs to you. The air in the room shifted. For the first time in my life, the imbalance of power tilted toward me. Not by luck. By design. My mother's design. Then Adrian placed a tablet in front of me, rows of data, timestamps, contracts. Evidence. Every major win Arden Dynamics has had in the past decade, he said, your brother Jax claimed credit for. But you did the work. You saved that company, and they hid you in the shadows to protect their narrative. My throat tightened. Betrayal had been my normal. But seeing it quantified, measured, monetized, stolen, ignited something inside me that had been dormant too long. Not grief, not hurt. Intention. As the chapter closed, one truth crystallized with terrifying clarity. My family hadn't just underestimated me. They had built their empire on the assumption that I would never wake up, neither from my coma nor from the role they forced me into. But I was awake now, and everything they tried to bury was rising with me. I left the hospital with more questions than strength, but I refused to return to the Arden estate. Instead, Solomon arranged for me to stay in the old Capitol Hill apartment my mother once rented in her 20s. It was small, quiet, and untouched by my family's influence, exactly what I needed. The hardwood floors creaked with every step, and the scent of old books lingered in the air as if the place still carried pieces of her. During my recovery, I opened the steel lockbox Solomon had brought. Inside was a single USB drive labeled in my mother's handwriting, for Kyle, when the time comes. My hands shook as I plugged it in. The drive contained dozens of video files dated 2004. In each one, my mother sat in her old office walls, stacked with binders, papers spread messily across the desk, speaking in a low, guarded tone. She looked younger, but her eyes already carried a heaviness I had never noticed. Solomon, barely in his 30s, appeared in several recordings. He's changing, Solomon, she said. If Elias ever turns on us, Cale must have protection. He must have something he can activate on his own. Hearing her voice again felt like reopening a wound I thought had scarred over. But as the videos continued, a chilling realization set in. My mother had foreseen everything. She saw the ambition growing in Elias long before I was old enough to understand it. She predicted he might rewrite the company's history, erase her contributions, and eventually discard me if I became inconvenient. I moved to the financial files next. Using the executive override badge my mother left behind, I accessed the hidden archive embedded beneath Arden Dynamics' main servers. What I found made my stomach twist. For 3 consecutive years, Elias had manipulated the financial reporting algorithm, masking losses, inflating growth, and creating the illusion of stability. Meanwhile, private documents in the system revealed a different kind of truth. Jax, the so-called strategic genius of the company, had caused massive losses, hundreds of millions, through reckless decisions and failed ventures. Elias covered the losses using off-book funds and buried the evidence deep. Then I found the emails. My father had contacted an old Seattle Times reporter, paying him to delete archived articles that credited my mother as the true brain behind Arden Dynamics. He destroyed interviews, rewrote press releases, and fed the narrative that he alone built the empire. Piece by piece, the scope of the deception came together. They hadn't only cut me out of their lives, they had tried to erase my mother entirely. As I closed the files, my phone buzzed. It was Adrian. "I know what you're looking at," he said, "and you need to understand something clearly. Elias won't sit still now that he knows you're alive and holding power. He'll strike fast." "What kind of strike?" I asked. "Whatever protects his empire. Whatever removes you as a threat. You need to be ready before he is." His voice wasn't dramatic or urgent, it was steady, cold, factual. And that terrified me more than anything else, because I knew he was right. The first cracks in the Arden Empire had appeared, and Elias would do anything to seal them, even if it meant burying me again. 2 weeks later, when I could finally walk without gripping the wall, I returned to Seattle under the cover of night. I approached Arden Dynamics the way a thief returns to the scene of a crime, quiet, calculating, unseen. My mother's override badge granted me access instantly, the doors unlocking as if welcoming back their rightful owner. Inside, I descended into the system's restricted layers and stripped away the filters Elias installed. One by one, his illusions dissolved. Hidden deficit reports, masked losses, undisclosed liabilities. A financial ecosystem built on deception. I gathered everything into a counter-analysis, a document I intended to use the moment he tried to silence me again. But before I could finalize it, an anonymous email appeared in my inbox. "If you want to survive, do not return to the company." It wasn't advice. It was a threat. I called Solomon immediately. He exhaled heavily after hearing my voice. "Kyle, Elias just sent a family meeting invitation," he said. "Penthouse at Queen Anne. Tomorrow night. You think it's a setup?" "Most likely," he answered. "But it might also reveal his next move." I didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." The next evening, I walked into the penthouse. My father greeted me with a smile so polished it belonged on a magazine cover, not on the man who abandoned me in a hospital bed. "Kyle," he said warmly, "we should put the past behind us." Marissa stood beside him, arms folded in a way that seemed both defensive and triumphant. Jax lingered near the window, tapping his foot, avoiding my eyes. Elias gestured for me to sit before sliding a thick contract across the marble table. "This is a reconciliation agreement," he said. "Mutual protection. No lawsuits, no complications. You simply relinquish your rights to the company, and we move forward peacefully." I flipped through the pages until I found the buried clause. If I signed, I would legally inherit the enormous deficit Jax had caused, hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. They had prepared this long before my accident. They hadn't been waiting for me to heal. They'd been waiting for me to surrender. "Sign it," Marissa urged. "It's the only way to avoid a public mess." Before I could respond, she added something that turned the air electric. "Elias has already hired a legal team to declare you mentally unfit to receive Lysandra's inheritance. We'll secure the trust if you don't comply." Jax, panicking, let his guard slip. "Dad said I'd already deleted all your records," he muttered. "But he didn't know you worked on Mom's old split server." All three froze, but it was too late. They had revealed everything. I stood, pushing the contract back toward Elias. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Now I know exactly how far you're willing to go." No apology followed. No excuses. No attempt to salvage dignity. They watched me leave without a word because they understood what I understood. The conflict was no longer avoidable. My return threatened everything they built on lies, and they were preparing for war. So was I. The deeper I dug into ardent dynamics, the more it became clear that numbers weren't the only things Elias had manipulated. My mother's death, something I had spent years forcing myself to accept, began to flicker in my mind with a new unsettling shape. So I took Adrian up on his offer to meet in person and flew to San Francisco. His office overlooked the bay, all glass and steel, but the moment I stepped in, the air felt heavier, almost expectant. Adrian stood by the window, hands in his pockets. She told me something once, he said before I even sat down. Lysandra looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If I die early, don't trust anyone in the Arden family except Cale." I thought she was being dramatic. Now I'm not so sure. I asked for access to her old medical contacts. Adrian arranged it within minutes. Later that day, I spoke with the physician who handled her final months. The older woman seemed hesitant at first, but when I explained what I'd uncovered, she let her guard down. "Your mother was concerned," she admitted. "She believed her medication had been altered. She insisted all records be printed and stored physically. She didn't trust the electronic system anymore." That sentence stayed with me long after I left her office. Back at my hotel, I compared her original printed files to the hospital's electronic records. The discrepancy was unmistakable. Dosages scanned, signatures, timestamps. Someone had tampered with everything that existed digitally. The last person who accessed the electronic file was an IT technician who worked directly under Jack's. My stomach tightened. The next day, Solomon unlocked a second safe my mother had left for me. Inside was a USB and a small notebook. The USB contained a single audio recording my mother speaking with Elias about temporarily transferring control to protect the company. Her voice was steady but strained. His was cold, smooth, calculated. "If something happens to me," she told him, "Cale must receive everything." "Something will happen," he replied. "Not a threat, a statement." I paused the recording. My hand shook with a mixture of grief and fury. In another archive folder, I found the 2004 meeting videos again. This time I paid closer attention. My mother said something I had missed before. "If I die unexpectedly before I can legally pass everything to Cale, someone inside the family may interfere. Build the safeguard to activate automatically if he's ever put in danger." She knew. She anticipated all of this. But the final blow came when an old acquaintance from Arden's internal security team messaged me. He sent a street camera video that had been erased from city servers my car the night of the accident, with another vehicle tailing me. The timestamp matched the night I lost control. It had never been an accident. Before I could reply, the follow-up message hit harder than any of his words. "The source of this footage came from a monitoring device your mother installed in the city's surveillance network. She left a failsafe even after she passed. My mother had built something far bigger and far more dangerous than I ever knew." I ended that night sitting alone in the dark, pulse racing, anger burning like a steady flame. My mother didn't just die, she was taken, and the same people responsible had tried to finish the job with me. This wasn't just a fight over inheritance anymore. This was justice for her, and payback for everything they'd done. I returned to Seattle the following morning. I didn't bother hiding my steps anymore. Fear had turned into determination. With my mother's override badge, I slipped into Arden Dynamics late at night and headed straight for the data center on the 19th floor. The moment I accessed the backup servers, the ones my mother had secretly built, I understood why Elias had been terrified of her legacy. Hundreds of emails existed here that the main system no longer contained. In the first string of messages, Elias negotiated with a shadow investment group in Chicago to sell off key Arden assets without board approval. Billions in intellectual property, core patents, operational rights, all behind the board's back. All planned to be revealed at the next shareholders' meeting. This was fraud on a scale even I hadn't imagined. I copied everything, but as I was pulling the remaining data, the elevator dinged. Jax walked in. He froze. I froze. His eyes darted from me to the open server racks, then immediately to his phone. "You're not supposed to be here," he stammered. Before he could hit send on whatever warning he planned to send Elias, I slipped past him and took the stairwell. A guard I'd known for years caught up to me near the landing. "You didn't see me," I told him. He shook his head. "Kyle, he has something planned, a move. People are saying you won't make it through the week if you keep pushing." I didn't have time to ask questions. I kept moving. Minutes later, an anonymous text vibrated my phone. "Don't trust anyone on the 22nd floor. Elias placed his people there." The 22nd floor handled legal archives, the exact place I'd planned to review next. Someone inside the company was watching out for me. Someone who didn't want Elias to win. The next morning I changed direction. Instead of going to the legal floor, I met with Thomas Reddington, a longtime board member who used to work closely with my mother. He greeted me privately in his lakeside office. "We've been watching Elias for over a year," he admitted. "Your mother suspected he'd eventually cross a line. She recruited me to stay on the board for one reason: to protect your position when the time came." The weight of his words hit me like a blow. He handed me a confidential report. Elias had been diverting the employee pension fund to cover the financial holes Jax created. If exposed, Elias would not only be removed, he would face federal charges. "You're not alone in this, Cale," Thomas said. Not anymore. I barely had time to absorb that before everything shifted again. When I left our meeting, I took the elevator down to the parking garage. The doors opened and someone shoved me backward. A masked man lunged, but he didn't try to kill me. His movements were precise, controlled, more warning than assault. He hit me once in the ribs, enough to bruise but not break. Then he grabbed my collar and whispered, "The shareholders' meeting in 3 days. That's where it ends. Either him or you." He threw me aside and vanished into the maze of cars. I stayed on the ground for a moment, breathing through the ache, letting the reality sink in. This wasn't backstage warfare anymore. This wasn't manipulation, lies, or paperwork. It had become physical, violent, immediate. My father was preparing to eliminate me, not metaphorically, not legally, but literally, before the shareholders' meeting. He wanted a clean stage. He wanted no obstacles. But he had no idea what I now held: emails, data contracts, recordings, medical evidence, and a board member who knew the truth. 3 days. 3 days until everything came to light. 3 days until the empire Elias built on lies finally collapsed. Or until he made sure I disappeared first. 3 days before the shareholders' meeting, everything shifted from investigation to execution. Solomon, Adrian, and I spent long nights in a rented war room, outlining every piece of evidence into categories: ownership, financial misconduct, report manipulation, and documented attempts to remove me as heir. We rehearsed my presentation again and again under harsh lighting and a timer. Solomon was relentless. "One shaky breath," he warned, "and Elias will seize on it. He'll claim you're unstable. Don't give him a millimeter." The night before the meeting, an anonymous email reached my inbox. "He will expose something about your mother you don't know." No signature, no follow-up. Just a sentence designed to destabilize me. Whether it was truth or manipulation, I had no idea. The morning of the meeting, Bell Harbor Conference Center buzzed like a financial battleground. Camera crews, VIP security, rows of black SUVs parked like armored plates along the sidewalk. My family was already there. Elias shook hands with top investors as if he hadn't spent years hiding the truth. Marissa whispered into the ears of influential shareholders, pressing her nails into their arms the way she always did when she wanted something. Jax was rehearsing his future of the company speech, wearing a confidence he didn't earn. Elias opened the meeting with doctored optimism charts of fabricated growth, announcements of a restructuring plan with Jax placed at the center, and a carefully scripted dig at Mikhail after his unfortunate accident is no longer capable of fulfilling his professional responsibilities. "We will support him as family." That was my cue. I entered through the executive entrance reserved only for founders, CEOs, and chairpersons. The door unlocked with my badge. The room gasped. Even from a distance, I could see Elias stiffen. I walked down the aisle as 2,000 investors turned to watch. Whispers rippled like static. The board halted the session and handed me the microphone. I looked at the sea of faces, all waiting for whatever came next. I didn't tremble. I didn't falter. I began with the truth. I presented the files Lysandra Hale as the founder and majority owner of Arden Dynamics, the erased records. The pension fund diverted to cover Jax's failures, the IT orders to remove every trace of my work, the hospital signatures, the abandonment, the trust clause Elias had activated himself. Then I played my mother's old video statements. Her voice filled the hall, steady and brilliant, naming me as her intended successor. Elias tried to counter immediately. He projected old medical records claiming my mother had psychological instability, arguing she had been unfit to run the company. I countered with her own recording explaining that Elias had forced her into counseling under work stress, not mental illness. It broke his argument clean in half. Then Marissa broke. Stress cracked her composure. Yes, she said too loudly, we signed documents to keep Kale away. We did it for Jax. He was supposed to inherit everything. The room erupted. Adrian rose next. He addressed the crowd with the calm assurance of a man used to controlling billion-dollar rooms. For 5 years, he said, Kale has been a principal strategist at Wolf Capital. His work has generated over $1 billion across our portfolio. He is not incompetent. He is exceptional. The audience shifted. Elias's narrative fell apart like thin glass. Then Solomon delivered the final blow. City surveillance logs showed my car being rammed from behind the night of my accident by a vehicle connected to one of Elias's secondary donors. The hall fell silent. The board called for an emergency vote. It wasn't even close. Elias removed. Jax suspended pending investigation. Marissa ordered to leave the hall. Then the chairwoman turned to me. Kyle, we ask that you step into a strategic leadership role to stabilize this company. Security escorted Elias out. As he passed me, he didn't look angry. He looked defeated, like a man finally realizing the truth he'd buried had grown too large to contain. For the first time, I stood on that stage not as someone erased, but as someone restored. The aftermath was brutal, necessary, unavoidable. With Elias officially removed, Arden Dynamics initiated a full-scale forensic audit. Every hidden transaction, every manipulated report, every deleted file was dragged into daylight. The results confirmed everything I already knew and far more. Jax's mishandled investments, the pension raid, the tampered medical records, the cover-ups, the IT purges. Marissa's involvement in altering my personal records triggered a separate legal review. I didn't take pleasure in any of it. It felt less like victory and more like disinfecting a wound that had festered for years. One afternoon, I entered my mother's old office, the one she used before Arden Dynamics grew too large for the original building. It was smaller, warmer, with a view of the sound. When I touched the desk, a panel shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a sealed letter addressed to me, dated the year she died. In it she wrote, "You will not be protected by the Arden name. You must protect yourself with truth, intelligence, and courage." She included a handwritten sequence of numbers. I recognized it instantly, a hash code. I entered it into the secure server and a locked equity account opened. Inside it were veto rights. Absolute. Unbreakable. The kind Elias could never override. She had protected me even in death. I chose not to become CEO. I refused to repeat my father's mistakes. I became Chief Strategy Architect, the role that aligned with who I had been all along, the architect behind the scenes, shaping direction, not hoarding power. That's when the unexpected message arrived. An email from Elias. He wrote only 2 lines. Your mother's death was not entirely natural, and I was not the only one with something to gain. It wasn't an apology. It was a warning. A door opening into another room of shadows I wasn't yet ready to enter. For now, I put the message aside. The company needed rebuilding before I chased ghosts. I rebuilt the company's recognition system to credit work properly. I reopened the old server room, the very one where they tried to erase me, and transformed it into a memorial space for my mother. Her portrait hung beside a plaque reading, "The truth will always resurface." I told every new employee the story. Not the scandal, just the truth of the woman who built the foundation they stood on. During restructuring, I discovered something extraordinary in my mother's archived research. She had been collaborating with an independent think tank to build an advanced financial prediction model far ahead of its time. She never finished it, but I would. That became my new mission, not revenge, not survival, but legacy. One quiet morning under Seattle's heavy gray sky, I stood outside Arden Dynamics. The building looked different now, not as a monument to Elias's ego, but as a testament to my mother's brilliance. My story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. But for the first time, I walked forward not as someone fighting to exist, but as someone finally standing where I was always meant to be. When the dust finally settled over Arden Dynamics, I found myself standing alone in the lobby long after everyone else had gone home. The glass walls reflected the city lights in fractured patterns, like the company itself, once broken, now slowly rearranging into something honest again. The quiet didn't feel threatening anymore. It wasn't the silence of abandonment or fear. It was the quiet that follows survival. The kind that lets you breathe and finally hear the sound of your own heartbeat without flinching. I thought a lot about my mother during those late hours. About the parts of her life I knew, the parts she hid and the parts she protected so fiercely that the truth outlived her attempts to control it. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't untouchable. She wasn't a legend carved out of marble. She was human, brilliant, flawed, determined, and she spent her life building something that she hoped I would one day finish. I used to think the company was her legacy, but now I understand it was only one fragment of it. The real legacy was the message that echoed through every recording, every handwritten note, every safeguard she put in place. The truth can be buried, but it is always stronger than the hands that try to silence it. And maybe that's what these past months were about, not just exposing what my family did, not just stepping into a role I never asked for, but learning that even when you're pushed out of your own story, you can still fight your way back into the narrative. I used to believe I was the forgotten son, the one who never fit the mold, the one they kept in the shadows because I didn't look like the heir they wanted. Now I know something different. They didn't hide me because I was weak. They hid me because I was the only one they couldn't control. They spent years trying to rewrite my place in this family, in this company, in my own life, and the moment I woke up from that coma, they realized their version of the story was over. Standing in front of thousands of shareholders was terrifying, but not because of Elias or the lies he crafted with such precision. It was terrifying because for the first time I was forced to choose what kind of man I wanted to be. Not the sun shaped by fear, not the shadow shaped by silence, but someone who could carry the weight of truth without letting it crush him. And when the vote was cast, when the room shifted in my favor, I didn't feel victorious. I felt responsible. Now, as I help rebuild Arden Dynamics, I think less about revenge and more about restoration. I've seen what power does to people when it becomes the reason they breathe. Elias didn't start out a villain, he became one because he feared losing control more than he feared losing himself. I refuse to follow that path. That's why I turned down the CEO title. That's why I'm choosing strategy over authority. I don't want to be the ruler of this company. I want to be its compass. There's still darkness surrounding my mother's death. Shadows that Elias hinted at before disappearing from public sight. I know one day I'll have to face that truth too. But not now. Right now, my purpose is here, repairing what was broken, honoring what was left behind, and becoming someone my mother would recognize. Someone she would be proud of. Someone who understands that you don't inherit strength. You build it moment by moment through the choices you make when no one is watching. And maybe that's why I'm sharing all of this. Maybe I needed to say it out loud so I can stop carrying it alone. Maybe I needed to put words to the years I spent buried under expectations that were never mine to begin with. Or maybe I just wanted you to hear me, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from, because stories like mine don't stay confined to boardrooms or court filings. They live in the quiet spaces between people who have been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside and are slowly learning to stand again. If you're here with me at the end of this journey, thank you. Truly. Before we wrap this up, I'd love to know you're still with me. Drop a listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from tonight. Maybe it's raining outside your window. Maybe the room is quiet. Maybe you're going through something of your own. Wherever you are, I'm glad you're here. And if my story has meant something to you, even just one moment that made you feel seen, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. Not out of obligation, but so you don't miss what comes next. Because there is a next chapter. The deeper investigation into my mother's death, the unraveling of what Elias hinted at the unfinished technology she left behind those stories, are still ahead of me, ahead of us. For now, I step forward into this new beginning with the understanding that healing isn't a destination. It's a process, a rebuilding, a choice made every morning to keep going even when the past pulls at your ankles. And I walk forward knowing this: I am no longer the son they tried to erase. I am the man my mother prepared me to become. I am the truth they failed to bury. Thank you for listening. Thank you for standing with me. And wherever you are tonight, whatever you're facing, I hope you feel just a little less alone.